Excuse me, you catch me just drinking my tea. We've just got a brief interlude in the weather. We're bivvy bound today. It's late October, it's cold, it's wet, and it's one of those days where I've got to stop in the bivvy. But what I'd like to talk to you about now is a rig that I've developed specifically for fishing over low-lying weed that you get this time of year. Now, without boring you all, what you'll find is that in the summer you get a proliferation of weed. So weed will be growing all the time, it gets cut back, it gets eaten by fish, there's various things that go on, but the most important thing about weed is it's constantly growing. Now you can fish in amongst that, and there's various ways. We tend to look as anglers for the clear spots to get the presentation right, to pin down the presentation, but when we get to the colder single digit water temperature figures, you'll find that the low-lying weed tends to die away, and that's when it becomes a presentation nightmare. And I had such an instance lately where I was fishing a lake where I'd done particularly well. I'd caught quite a few big fish over the course of a sort of 8 to 10 week campaign, and I thought to myself, I've got it sussed. But I was in the peg and I realised after a couple of days that my presentation wasn't right. I would reel in and I would find that silkweed had festooned itself onto my line. It had come down on the angle of the line, so that very much like cotton wool over a ball, a marble ball, it had covered up my bait, and so that made my presentation poorly. What I had to think about was, how could I have a presentation where I knew that the visual aspect of carp fishing, which is really important, is that carp can still see your bait. It was lying in amongst the silkweed and was fishing, and it wasn't caught up in the weed. Well, say hello, ladies and gentlemen, to my version of the stiff, soft, long combi rig. Now, you will have seen on the last long rig we did, which was using a stiff braid, coated braid. This one is completely different. Now let me talk to you about the mechanics of it and how I managed to come up with the idea. Well, it's basically a fluorocarbon boom that I've tied, and what I wanted was something that would go down nice and steady and would actually rest in amongst, predominantly on top of the silkweed. And if we look at the business end, which is the hook and the bait, put a little needle on there, you can see that what I've done is I've got an anchor point which is spread over 1 centimetre, maybe 2 centimetres. And I wanted that because, think about it physically. If you have an anchor point that's like a swan shot or a blob of rig putty on there, that makes it more go through the weed. If you spread the weight over a longer area, you get it to come down and lay in amongst the weed. Now what I wanted was, if you have stiff presentation, a stiff material through the entirety of your rig, when a carp comes to suck in the food which is in amongst the low-lying silkweed, it's going to get caught. And I didn't wanted that. I still wanted something that was supple enough so that as the carp came down and started feeding amongst it, or even tilting up and using its fins, I wanted something that would lift up and would get taken first. Now all of you know that I use the PB funnel web mesh bags on my hook bait, but I wanted something that would lift up when that carp started feeding. And what I found was, with a multi-rig hook arrangement using a piece of shrink tubing, I had the perfect combination. Now let me just talk about the components. You can see quite clearly the length of the rig there, and we're talking, I don't know, probably 2.5 to 3 foot, and that's the bit that goes down. Now this again is a short range tactic. I wouldn't advocate using this more than 20 wraps. I actually caught my big fish using this at between 15 and 18 wraps. So you can see that it's something that's not for long range. The other important thing is, that's on where my left hand is on like an helicopter setup with a lead, and here is the hook and the bait on it. With what you will find there, you put the PVA bag. I'll actually show you what I'd put on. I'd put something like this, which is 5 baits, and that would simply get hooked on there. So what you get is you get 2 splashes. You get the splash of the lead and you get the splash of the mesh bag going down. So because you're fishing reasonably close, it's a visual thing as well. When you cast out and you hit the clip, as it hits the water, you've got 2 splashes. Now that tells you that it's not tangled. Because it's a stiff boom, fluorocarbon boom, as you can see, that keeps the separation there as well. So let me very quickly tell you the components that I used. I used our red ant fluorocarbon. That's the mainstay of the boom. The soft section that was the hook arrangement on the multi-rig slip D type of setup was the chameleon braid. Here's an important part, and really is the key to this. When it came to the anchor point, I wanted something that was weighted over as long a slimmer area as possible, and that's when I worked out that the anti-tangle sleeve would be best to do. The knot arrangement was not with a swivel, so when it came to attaching the fluorocarbon and the chameleon, it was simply done with an overhand knot, granny knot on the fluorocarbon. The chameleon went through that, simple blood knot, tied down, pulled tight, and what I did was, with the help of a lighter, the tag end of the fluorocarbon was blobbed, and you'll see with the cutaway that we've done, you can see how important that little blob and the tag end is to keep away from the chameleon. You mustn't get it anywhere near the braid because it could damage it. And then of course I snipped off the end of the anti-tangle sleeve so that it goes over the knot correctly. So if we go back to it, you can clearly see that the knot is in the middle of the anti-tangle sleeve. So not only is it weighted to go down steady, it also protects the knot tremendously. Now one other point which is just as important is when it comes to the attachment end, it's a very small loop. It's not a very large loop, it's a very small loop, and the anti-tangle sleeve this time is our normal anti-tangle sleeves, not the tungsten ones, and that's because at the lead end I don't want additional weight to pull it in to the weed. So that is the arrangement, and the results were tremendous. What I found was, from staring at motionless rods when I knew fish were in the area, suddenly I started to get pickups, and we'll talk about the actual success of the session at a later date, but suffice to say I managed to catch 30s in the plural, I managed to catch a 45 and the king of the crop a 53. So give it a go, think laterally, think how it will be affected in your swim, and you won't be disappointed.